And today I'm joined by Carrie Alexander, frontwoman, songwriter, and guitarist for Bad Bad Hats, a band that just released their fourth album, self-titled. And kind of getting into that right out of the gate, you guys reserved the self-titled label for the fourth album, citing it
Yep.
as almost a bit of a reintroduction to the band. How has your perspective changed on, kind of going into the many steps that go into making music since like the It Hurts EP, or, has it changed at all?
Yeah. It's a good question. Like in some ways, um, I mean, to be honest, I think we ended up with the self-titled label for this record mostly because we couldn't think of another title for it. Um,
Yeah.
which, is sometimes how it goes. But I think once we like were like, well, I guess we could just call it Bad Bad Hats. The more we thought about that, I think it made sense to us because in some ways, like to your question, like I feel like this album, the making of it was much more reminiscent of like the It Hurts EP and like our very first release. And that release, um, Chris and I just made like in our like first apartment that we lived in
Yeah.
together, just like with like one microphone and like an acoustic guitar and like a kazoo. Um, and it just sort of came together very like naturally and very like sort of like over like time. Um, but then, you sort of get into like you have more money and like more ambitions. And so like we started working with a producer and like going to a studio and it's like, okay, you got 2 weeks to like do this and sort of get
Yeah.
into that mindset, which I honestly like really enjoyed that process. Um, but then for the fourth album, it just sort of like the pandemic being like isolated at home. We just sort of got back into a pattern of just like recording. Um, just sort of like more slowly, more casually. Um, and then sort of like we're like, wait a second, like I think we have like an album here. So I do think that like it is a bit of like that like back to basics thing.
Yeah, I got back to your roots. I'm glad you made that up
Yeah.
because I was, right after that gonna say, at what point do you, you're working on music, you're doing something fun, you're doing kind of stuff at home, and then you realize, oh, like we're making an album. This is kind of what we're
Yeah.
doing. Um, and I know that you also said that the album in this case was recorded over a long period of time. How much of the kind of sound that you're going for is predetermined? You say this is what we want to do going into it, and then at that point, how do the goals and the aesthetics and sound of the album shift as you're making the songs, as you're working your way through it?
Yeah. Like I think we've um never really like I've never been one to like know like at least like lyrically like story or something like I want to tell
Hmm.
or like we're not really ones to have like a concept like figured out from the start. But I do think we know like what we're like into going into an album, like the songs that like we've been vibing with or like artists we've been vibing with. And um so that's kind of been interesting to sort of like it's more just like what sounds fun to
Yeah.
like work on for this record. And then I just usually have like a pile of like my songs. And then we just sort of like apply like the aesthetics to it kind of
Yeah.
like in the studio. Um, but this album was really different because it was born from like our Patreon page.
Right.
Um, where like we were very specifically writing songs to like musical prompts. So like TPA was our write a new wave song. Bored in the Summer was our write a song with a key change song. Meter Run was our write a song with a wordless chorus song. Um, so that was kind of cool. So like each like a lot of the songs on the album were very pointedly like we have a sonic goal for this
Yeah.
song. But then it was kind of interesting to see how that they like then like managed to work together like
Yeah.
as a whole on the album, which I think was like the greater theme ended up being just like sort of like quirky sounds, like fun, like high energy, like sampley moments, keyboard, like synths. Um, So it's cool that it's sort of like there ended up being a thread between them, even though each song was sort of like its own path.
Yeah, they had like different goals, but in the end, they kind of came together to form the
Yeah.
cohesive project. I think that the idea of kind of doing a monthly prompt on the Patreon, I think it's a lot of fun. Are there any prompts or sounds that you have not gotten to yet that you're like, oh man, I really hope that we can do that at some point?
Yes, I do have a note in my phone
Oh,
because
nice. Okay.
we've been doing it for like years at this point now.
Yeah,
Um, so we do feel like we've gone through
quite a
um
bit.
quite a bit, and we're like feel like maybe are we like running out of like themes.
You've got to get
Oh,
more and
one,
more out there now as it
yeah,
progresses.
exactly. So like, um, oh yeah, one I'm kind of interested in is hair metal. Um,
Okay.
I think that would be a really interesting challenge, to try to do that, like sort of like the like heavy but like also like sparkly thing.
Like Twisted Sister kind of Motley
Yeah,
Crue. Yeah, nice. Okay.
exactly. Yeah, you know what I mean? So that one's very intriguing to me. Also, we have on here um boy band, just as I don't know, I think that was like mostly just like harmonies and like,
Yeah,
like
there's kind
very
of like
like
nice thick group vocals.
exactly. So that'd be pretty cool. We also have like write a TV theme. I guess I assume we'd have to like make up a television show for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, we still got
Yeah,
some
you got a
homework.
lot to tap into.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's tons you can get into before running out.
Yeah.
And kind of terms in sort of the context of the release of the album. I know that you released your last two records under Don Giovanni.
Yeah.
A decision that has kind of seemed to grant you all a bit of a farther reach,
Hmm.
more resources in terms of actually getting the music out there. How has the experience been, kind of working under a bit of a larger operation that expands beyond where you might just be living now?
Yeah, it's been great. I think in many ways, like before we were on Don Giovanni, we are on a label called Afternoon Records, which
Right.
was local to the Twin Cities. And pretty small, but I mean the that afforded us like I think a lot more like freedom in terms of like the decisions and like a lot more like attention because like at some point we were like one of the few bands on the label.
Right.
But Don Giovanni, thankfully for us, like has a similar kind of like band friendly like focused approach, even though they are bigger, but it feels familiar to us.
Hmm.
Um in the way that Joe, who runs it, like operates. But it has been amazing to have the album in stores. Like it's kind of a weird thing to think about, but like our Afternoon Records albums were not like distributed widely. So you could kind of only get the record like from us if we were on tour.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. Is like we get to like say hi to you and thank you and like sign your record and
Hmm.
um but to see the more recent records like in stores is so cool and like people can pick it up wherever they are and like we just went on our first like UK Europe tour and like to see the album like over there is amazing and
Yeah.
that like just to have a bit more of that reach has been really nice.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
you're seeing them in stores that are outside of the state, outside of the country. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
But I guess sort of inversely, the complete opposite effect, and this could be even over the past decade. But how has the sort of location of operations, the Bad Hats sort of command center, how has the city that you've lived in kind of like shaped the sound of your music, shaped the influence of your music, and how you go about it?
Yeah, I honestly think sometimes it's like hard to know like how exactly how much of an impact it has, but I know for sure that like I always say like I don't think that this band like would be what it is without the Twin Cities.
Hmm.
Just um it's just like such a perfect balance of like not being too big so like don't feel like you're like drowning
Hmm.
in sort of like bands and um venues and just sort of like it's not like overwhelming at the same time that there are like it is a really strong scene in terms of like the venues that are here and like the um opportunity for like radio play. There's like a great local like independent radio station
Hmm.
and a really great college radio station that um are really keen on playing local artists and supporting local artists. and the people here are just super excited about like their local bands. Um, so I think it's just like kind of a perfect place to be a young band, like
Yeah.
starting out and growing and sort of getting that like positive reinforcement like back of like, okay, cool, like people are
Yeah.
into this. Um, it's not particularly like cutthroat, and I don't know any other scenes, but I just can imagine, that it might feel like you're like paddling like upstream in a place like LA or New York, which is just like so overwhelming and huge.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time though, like I guess the benefits of places like that are just like endless opportunities to like meet people and do things. But I think the Twin Cities for me is like a nice balance and maybe
Yeah.
more my speed.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's so that I just think that alone just like was kind of like a perfect like space for us to start out because I think we needed to do some like growing and learning as like a young band,
Hmm.
um, honing our skills a little bit. Um, so that was great, and then it is a great scene musically too, just like to sort of come up alongside bands like Hippocampus and um, Caroline Smith and just like a lot of these like great like songwriting groups um and then also like bands that we started out with like called Strange Names and Carol I think of.
Yeah.
um yeah, just like really inspiring and like great bands to be on bills with, see play, see how they operate. um yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And while we can stay for a little bit more, stay on the topic of outside influence in terms of the music that you're making and kind of like how you're operating artistically. I know that way back when you and Chris exchanged CDs as a bit of a form of communication while you guys were
Yeah.
apart, and keeping in touch. Citing that later as a later influence on the music that you were making, on the band's sound. Over the years, now then somewhere in between, how has the music that you've listened to impacted maybe the creation of this album or the creation of past albums?
Yeah, I do feel like I love I make like a playlist like every year
Hmm.
that's like labeled the year, and it's like a place where I put um songs that just sort of like come to me like in the day. It's like you're in a cafe and you're sitting, you're like, oh, like, like what's that song? It's like I'm like in the corner, like on a chair, like trying to like Shazam the
Yeah.
speaker. Or like a song, like we'll just be like talking about something and a song will come up and like, oh my God, I love that song. And, like I'll put those all on the playlist, just sort of be like, remember like moments when music like came into my life, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like chance
Um,
encounters.
exactly, yeah. Um, and I often do feel like also when we're making our records, I like to sort of go through those playlists and like pick out the songs that are really resonating with me, and especially like knowing the songs I'm writing, it's like, oh, like this demo with this like production would be like perfect.
Hmm.
Um so I feel like I've always sort of been like working like that, and like when Chris and I first started, like I think um Jessica Lee Mayfield and Darwin Dees were like two artists I always think of like in those mix exchanges, that were like I was sort of like zeroed in on, like that's like the sound I want for like our band, and that's kind of like where my head is at like when I'm writing the song. So I feel like I've always operated like that, which is just like having like an inspiration like palette like
Yeah.
always at the ready. Um and yeah, it has changed over the years. I feel like I seem to remember like Walkman, especially like my goal with that record was to write songs. So we'd been playing as like a power trio for a
Hmm.
while. And some of our lightning round songs, our second album, were little difficult to play with just three
Yeah.
people. Um, so I really wanted to like write an album that I felt like we could execute well as a trio. So a lot of like the songs we were listening to were um, like rock trio songs or like more
Yeah.
like guitar forward songs. Um, but yeah, I feel like for the Flower album, our most recent album, um, I was really inspired by all the playlists I was making for the Patreon. And
Yeah.
especially I think we did like a synth pop month. And it's funny that that song didn't make the cut. It was considered for the the album, but didn't quite make the cut. But the songs that I found doing research on that
Hmm.
um, were like especially inspiring to me, like for whatever reason. Um, so yeah, so I think like I had like synths on the brain and like drum machines on the brain and just sort of like some of those like sort of like wild 80s like frills. Um so yeah. Yeah, it's always changing, which is cool. Like I've always felt like kind of like a sponge. I
Yeah,
just want to
very
like
malleable in terms of what you can
I, wa-
make.
I want to absorb.
Um,
Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe sort of the angle and context of taking those Patreon songs and kind of fitting them onto the album maybe answers this as well. But listening to the album in terms of writing, I feel like it's easy to like catch glimpses of like these vignettes and small details of greater stories that aren't quite being told, just bits and pieces of them. Is there a sort of an intentional balance or prioritizing of one or the other of first or secondhand stories and emotions for the writing process? At what
Hmm.
point do you say, "Oh, I will tell a story that isn't necessarily mine"?
Right. Yes. I do feel like I'm often sort of working in secondhand stories, like
Hmm.
in my writing, like for better or worse. I feel like I've tried to like get myself to write it a little bit more firsthand. Um, but I just really love writing songs about like heartache and sort of like the like push and pull of like
Yeah,
hope in like a new relationship or like an ending relationship and like um but it's just true that I've been in a relationship for like 15 years at this point.
yeah.
So it's been a long time since I actually experienced like
It's
a
like a bit of
breakup.
a foreign concept.
Exactly. So but I do love those stories and those feelings. So I do feel like I'm often looking towards like my friends' stories or like just like pop culture, just like watching movies and reading books and sort of
Yeah.
like taking in those feelings like the classic rom-com like Rise and Fall, just trying to like tap into that kind of thing.
Hmm.
Because I do love writing about that feeling. So I do I yeah, I definitely do um dabble in the secondhand stories. But I've tried to but I also think fans can tell which stories
Yeah.
are your stories. So like a song like Things We Never Say is very much like a first that's like a very much more personal story and like the fans really connect with
Yeah.
that song. Um Same with like a song like Happy off of the new record. Though that one's funny. That's like the first verse is like my story and like the second verse is like my friend's story.
Yeah.
So that's one where it's like sort of you get a little bit of both.
Yeah. Best of both worlds in
Um
that case.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, I like to do both and I do like to remind myself that it's important to give a little bit more of myself in the
Yeah.
songs.
And I know that a while back you mentioned that some of the songs on Lightning Round were actually written before Psychic Reader, so there's a sort of
Yeah.
overlapping of time periods in terms of what's being
Yeah.
written and what's being put out. I suppose in terms of I guess the non-Patreon oriented songs of this project, or even those as well. Are there any old ideas for this album that were revisited with a fresh perspective that maybe you kind of got a new angle on?
Yeah, let me think. Um I'm sure there were. I'm like going through the songs in my head now. Um, but I guess like this album, maybe more than some of the other albums, did maybe overall have a lot more new material. And I think the Patreon is the reason for that. It's just
Yeah.
like, um, just that like the prompts were taking us out of our comfort zone. So it's like a lot harder to be like, well, I'll just use this thing that's been sitting
Yeah.
around. So like, I don't know. I don't think I have a thing that's been sitting around for that. So I think I need to just come up with something. I think probably um Back to My Body is one of the older ideas. That song actually was recorded to be on Walkman.
Okay.
Um it was recorded in the Walkman sessions. Um, but as I talked about, like I really wanted Walkman to be like a guitar
Yeah.
like trio album, and it just didn't feel like it made sense there. But I'm really glad that it feels like it fits great um on this album. So that one is definitely older, and I'm glad that yes, that it can sort of, it is sort of interesting to think about, like, what fits on an album, what doesn't fit on an album, because it's kind of just like your choice. Like,
Yeah.
um, but I do think that that one just sort of like comes alive a bit better, like in the context of these songs on this album.
Hmm.
Actually, you know what? The new stuff, a fan reminded me recently. I had even forgotten, but the new
Yeah.
stuff, the chorus of that song is like ancient. Um, and that's like a song that was called originally called the three note song.
Hmm.
Um, this is only it's like three chords. Um, and I guess I had posted on my like SoundCloud or something in like 2012 or
Yeah.
something, like in my college days. And I always really loved that chorus. And, there are just certain things that you write and you just still like really believe in.
Hmm.
And you just like hope they find a place. And so I'm glad that one
Yeah.
finally found its home.
Yeah, and shifting gears a little bit, in terms of touring, live settings. I mean, that's how I got introduced to you guys in the first place, way back when you were touring with the Front Bottoms.
Yes, you mentioned that. Yeah.
So I know that you guys did you and Chris did the living room tour, which was
Yeah.
very very the concept was playing in houses, doing house shows. What value do you guys find in the setting of a house show versus maybe a more traditional venue?
Yeah. I feel like I think for us, like we've always um just sort of seen the value in, especially I think in like a social media like dominated like music world, like we've benefited from things like Discover Weekly on
Yeah,
Spotify, and like having an Instagram page where like people all over the world can connect with us. And those have been really amazing tools. But I think we've seen the most like consistent and like meaningful growth in our band, like at the shows, like at the merch table after the shows, like getting to
yeah,
talk to people. I think of that Front Bottoms tour as like one of our favorite tours we ever did. Um, Partially because like their fans are just so great and like so fun and like welcoming, and um just to like meet all those people after the show every night, like even if people weren't like buying something, like they would just like walk past the table and just be like, y'all were amazing, and we could be like, yeah, thank
yeah,
you, and like throw in like take a sticker, like everyone gets a sticker, like we'll see you. And
yeah,
I just think like having that kind of one-on-one interaction with people is just like so special to us. It like it's very validating for us. And then I also just think um I don't know, like the fans just like get to know us as people,
yeah.
and hopefully, like want to support us because they talk to us and they know our story. And so the living room tour just felt like even like more of that, just sort of
Yeah.
like small space, like I get to tell stories, which I love to do. Um and sort of give context to the songs, um but then also like I really loved because to me the songwriting is my favorite part of this whole thing.
Yeah.
um and it's just really cool to sort of like, I didn't even realize that this would be like a thing, but like I just really felt like the songs that I wrote just got like really highlighted in that setting of just like,
Hmm.
here are the lyrics, here are the melodies, like we can really just like sit with those. So that was very gratifying for me. And then yeah, just to be in a small space with people having those interactions. And then also just like I was very like heartwarmed by just like people opening up their homes like for the shows
Yeah.
and being so generous, and like um I don't know, it's just like very like fulfilling every night to be like, wow, this is like, like a community of people who are just like choosing to spend their time like listening to music and like meeting new people. And I don't know, just nice, just sort of like good vibes
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
And speaking of shows, speaking of doing shows, and speaking of nice little interactions maybe at the merch table,
Yeah.
one helps humanize you guys, leave an impact on the people that are seeing you. If you could sell one bad hats item, branded item, official,
Okay.
copyright, that you might not
Okay.
find at another band's merch stand. So we're not talking like a T-shirt. We're talking something different.
Okay.
what is that bad hats item that you guys are selling?
That we are actually selling, or like try to come up with something.
Hypothetically, if like I want to sell something that you would not typically find at a merch stand.
That's a great question. I do feel like we've often discussed selling branded kazoos.
That I see, that's kind of what my brain immediately went to.
Yeah. But basically we're just like afraid. We're afraid that readily available kazoos plus alcohol might make for a chaotic
Yeah,
situation.
that could be like a gift bag out the door as people are
Exactly. Yeah,
leaving.
yeah. Yes, maybe we hide
Yeah,
them before the show, but after the show, sell them. But that's something we have often thought about, the branded kazoo. Yeah,
I think that'd be a great idea.
yeah. See?
Um, I think that just about wraps it up for my questions on the album. A couple miscellaneous questions. But I do have one more heavy hitter for you. Probably
Okay.
biggest question of the interview. Um, when it comes down to it,
Yeah.
are you taking Backstreet Boys or Spice Girls?
Oh, I gotta go Spice Girls.
Okay.
Honestly, like, yeah, I gotta go Spice Girls. I think I do love Backstreet Boys, and some of those songs I think are like, just like those melodies. I think were like very formative to me
Hmm.
as like a songwriter. But just like the whole thing of the Spice Girls,
Just the whole idea.
the whole concept, the execution, the songs, yeah, gotta give it to them for sure.
Well, that just about does it. Thank you so much for your time. Go ahead. Anything to look forward to? Anything to shout out at the end there?
Oh, yes, stay tuned. We're still like in album promo mode. We got more shows coming. If we haven't come to your city yet, stay tuned. We're on our way. And also, um, the 10th anniversary of our debut record is next year. So
All
we're gearing
right.
up for some celebratory stuff. So also stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.